All right. Should be coming in. Put that right there. Nope. Move this up a little bit. There we go. Now it can be seen. There we go. Yeah. All right.
That'll do it.
All right. The feed is live on my screen. Let me make sure the audience. Oh, yeah, I see it coming through. Got the live chat up. How are we doing, you guys? How are we doing? Check in. Philip, Merc. All right.
Morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Do you guys have good audio for both of us?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Test.
We're going to do a test. Make sure we're all right. Hello, plus. It sounds great, says the chat. All right. Cool.
Good.
How is everybody doing? Can you guys hear both Philip and me in the chat this morning? Hello, we're getting pluses in the chat. That's a good sign. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Good Morning Kyiv. We have an amazing return guest, Philip ITTNER.
Good to be back. Good
to have you back
as well.
Yeah, we had him on in July.
And we had lunch about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we did with Dylan.
Yeah,
it was great. Dylan's a great guest. He's a young kid. He knows what he's talking about for being so young. When I was his age, I had no idea. I didn't even know how to tie my shoes still.
When I was, what is he? Something like
24,
25?
Yeah, 24.
Like
I think he just turned 24.
I would have just graduated from college, and I was living on my first overseas assignment in London.
Oh, wow.
But back then I was just getting started, so he's already, you're right. He's been on the ground here. There's a lot of guys that you have on here. One of the nice things is that they're on the ground. They're physically here.
Yeah.
I get a little bit cagey about guys who talk about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine who've never been here, much less Russia and here. We can go through a long list of guys, of posers, who pretend to know what's going on both sides, pro and anti. The ones that really get under my skin are the anti guys.
Of course. The
pro guys who are pretending to be pro, who are in it for their own purposes, that bothers me as well. But
I think they'll collapse to their own hubris, though. Do you think?
Yeah, ultimately they'll be shown to be posers and stuff. And look, there's also guys out there who are legitimately doing stuff from open source intel and approach it from a different direction. But if you really want to talk about Ukrainians, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, why it's happening, what the relationship is and the history is between Russia and Ukraine, unless you've physically been here and talked to Ukrainians and spent time on the ground in Ukraine or indeed in Russia, you're just talking out of your ass.
What kind of perspective does it add to someone at home that, because there's tons of people that watch streams, but they don't maybe get to travel, but what does it add? What kind of level?
Well, you get to know the Ukrainian people as people, not as some sort of abstract idea. You get to know guys who, like, every Ukrainian you meet has a history of a loss in their family because of the tragedy of the history of this country. Like, every single Ukrainian I know, in this war now included, everybody has been touched by loss because this land has been fought over for so long and it's been so brutal here. The Holodomor, the Second World War, the Soviet occupation and the cruelty of the KGB. You get to learn that by talking to people who have direct connection to the history and the culture and the country and that cannot be, there's no substitute for that. And even going to Russia, I don't like to name names because I don't like to give them oxygen, but there's a certain pro-Russian who's clearly been invited over to Moscow to go see the nicest things. And
does his name rhyme with Haxon?
Yeah.
Haxon Stinkle.
Ugh.
Yeah.
And he's been given the privileged tour by his handlers, but he's never going to go to the provinces. Like, I've been to places. I lived in, for those of you who don't know me, I used to be a CBS television producer and a reporter in Moscow for 5 years at the end of Yeltsin's era and the beginning of Putin's era. And then I was in the war in Georgia in 2008, and I've covered this part of the world for a long, long time. Without going to some of the more obscure places and not being on a handheld trip like this fella, this not a fella, not a fella, this piece of shit. Pardon, I can swear. I can swear. Going around pulling artillery, firing off artillery rounds and stuff like that, dressing up in fatigues. He's being taken around on a very curated vision of what Russia is. Go to Norilsk, go to Ekaterinburg, go to, Irkutsk, go to the provinces where your usual Chelyabinsk. These people live in abject poverty, and they don't have to because it's a relatively rich country.
Yeah.
But again, just to get back to the point is, unless you actually involve yourself in this, like you coming over here, I'm sure that you have learned things that you had no idea about when you sat down on this course.
Yes. Especially the further you get to the east. I mean, it's one thing coming to Kyiv.
There's also the fighting.
Yeah, it's like an onion kind of, right? It's like there's a layer. You come to Kyiv, of course, we have the air defense that go off, and
thank goodness.
Thank goodness, right? And I got to experience that, but it's still like a level of safety here.
Have you seen the Patriots yet?
No, I don't think I want to. I think I'll pretend like
I've seen the Patriots in operation 2 times.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard it a 3rd time.
Yeah.
But I've seen it twice.
Pretty amazing.
Whoa, man! And I have footage, but I can't share it because OPSEC.
After the war.
Yeah, it'll be for a documentary or something down the road, or something that I'll put together. But the Patriot missile system, I've seen it fire over there somewhere, and it's just so impressive. You really thank God for U.S. support and air defenses, and let's hope that we can spread. I was just down in Odessa.
They need one down there bad.
They need one down in Odessa real bad. They need air defense up at the front to protect their forces. But it's really important. Again, anyhow, it's just there's something about physically coming over here and learning things, and then our responsibility is try to relay that back to an audience, because obviously not everybody can come here.
What are some things you've learned when you lived in Russia in contrast to like what you've learned when you lived here in Ukraine? Positives and negatives. Let's go positives first and then negatives.
Well, Russia. Yeah, I have lots of really good Russian friends. Yep. They're really warm, friendly people. Once you become a friend. Yep. The hospitality is amazing. The kindnesses and all the rest of it. These are the kind of people you can call at 3 a.m. when you're having a crisis, and they will, they'll be there for you. And there's lots of other things about Russia's in many ways, in lots of places, stunningly beautiful. Yeah. But sadly, it's a country, because of a whole bunch of not just circumstances, but actually things that they have done in their history, where they have this really screwed up mentality of we're an empire, first and foremost. That's the thing that kind of at the root of it is this sense of like, we're a great country and we deserve to expand, and we're good to our good little satellite countries that we have, and it's very patronizing. It's very, and then also, the relationship between the state and the church and manipulating their minds there. I don't know if I said this last time I was on your show, but I say this regularly, and I've had people steal this from me, but regardless, there's an inflection point between the United States and Russia. So the similarities are we're both really big countries. We both have access to both the Atlantic and the Pacific. Obviously, Russia more than the United States in terms of size, and that works for them and against them, because they can't really get goods to the Pacific because of there's a massive stretch of Russia which is completely uninhabitable. So, unlike getting something from something that is unloaded at Atlantic City, can make its way to San Francisco in a couple of weeks. Right. But when it comes to Russia, it's near impossible. So there's that. There's a difference there, but we're both really big countries. We're both multi-ethnic. But whereas we fought our way into nature and developed our country with roadways and systems, and we're integrated. You can make it from Atlantic City to San Francisco. You can drive that.
Yeah, you can.
But you can't do that in Russia because, and in no small part because also while we dug into nature, they clawed their way out of nature. So they have a very defensive mentality. The first thing they do is they build what's called a Kremlin, which is just a castle.
Yeah.
It's just a Russian word for castle. But it's always with the idea that the wolf is at the door. Whereas in the United States, which is they see as their main enemy, we are similar in that we're large and multi-ethnic and a lot of other similarities, but we have optimism. And that's a huge inflection point between Russia and the United States. So there's, that's one thing I learned living in Russia, the differences and the similarities between the United States and America. But there's so much more.
What about systemically, like government? Like, how does it?
Well, the government in Russia generally is a separate organ. That it's about power, it's about dominance. But generally, if you're an average citizen in Russia, the less interaction you have with the government, the better. Now, some would argue that's the same way with the United States.
Yeah.
But even down to like going to get your license at the DMV,
Oh wow.
you're going to have to pay off somebody. It's because corruption is part of the system. It's built in Russia. It's not even considered corruption. It's just like
It's just the
that's
system.
that's what you do.
Yeah.
And they accept that. They're far more fatalistic in Russia, where they're willing to accept that. And their answer to that is not I want to change it.
Yeah.
Although of course we're talking in broad strokes. Of course
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are those who want reforms in Russia, but for the most part, Russians are like, my response to that is the least interaction I can have with the state, the better.
Yeah.
Whereas here in Ukraine, for example, and a lot of what this war is about is we don't want to live that way anymore. We don't want to. We want to be European with a rule of law and system, and we don't want to just shrug it off and say, well, that's the system. And a huge part of the corruption in Ukraine, not exclusively,
Yep.
but a huge part of it is the influence of Russia, and
Yeah.
a lot of why they're fighting to break away, because they don't want to live that way anymore. I don't know why Russians and those who support Russia can't get that through their head. They don't want to live like that anymore.
Is it just like people caught up in the propaganda of it all, like the messaging of it? Like it's
so.
like entertainment. It's
I
like
think so.
flashy.
Well, and I think there are those who are approaching this not as real human beings living in real systems and countries and all the rest of it, but they look at it either in the abstract by what they read or they see on television, or as part of a larger a perspective on the globe. And like I am anti-American. I do not like American hegemony. So I want there to be a counterbalance to American hegemony, no matter who it is.
Right.
Sort of thing. And I think if these people, like this moron popping off rounds of artillery, if he really got to know Russia, unless I don't like to be as cynical as to say, he wouldn't be, that he would remain the same. But you can't go to some of these places in Russia and see it and be like, who cares? As long as it's a counterbalance to the United States. Look at how the Russian people themselves. I've said before as well. I hope that this war, when Russia loses this war, which it will, that it looks in the mirror. That it drives them to look in the mirror and say, "What are we doing wrong? How do we have to change?" In their heart, I think they know how to change. But I'm hoping that when they're defeated by the Ukrainians, that they'll do the hard work. It's going to be a lot of hard work because that's a screwed up country from way back when. So, and in many ways, so is Ukraine. But at least Ukraine is willing to do the hard work. The Russians have not been pushed into a place
Right.
where they need to do the hard work. And maybe, hopefully, when they lose here, they'll do it.
How do you reconcile, or how do you think people reconcile that are pro-Russian either by proxy, by just being anti-Ukraine, and that's how they're going to pretend that they're not pro-Russian, they're just going to be just anti-Ukraine, but also be patriotic Americans? that say that they're patriots, America first or whatever, but yet they're supportive of a regime like Russia. How can you explain that? Can you explain that?
I mean, it comes from a place of ignorance. It's again, you can't be. I mean, Russia is such a screwed up country, and I hate saying that because I have individual Russians that I love. I'll tell you, here's a quick example. So, well, you can go to Moscow, you can go to St. Petersburg, and you can go to the kind of jewels, or the pieces that they prop up and make look nice and pretty and all the rest of it.
Yep.
But then you can also go to a place like when I went up to a town called Norilsk Nikol, which is in the Arctic. It's in the far north of Russia. And it's a place where they have the world's largest nickel mine, and they just tear apart the environment. It's like going on Mars. It's surreal. It's like Mordor or something.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Burnt out trees and things.
Wow.
And the pollution is just awful.
Bad.
Yeah. And my friend and I, a colleague, and I were doing reports from there. And we went into the town where all the workers live, next to the foundry where they melt down the nickel. And we found these two kids. And we go up and we talk to them, and they were like, "What's it like living in nickel? What's how bizarre?" And they're like, "Well, it sucks in the winter because the sun never shines and all this other stuff, And then they literally said to us, and then sometimes, if the wind is blowing the wrong direction, our parents just tell us to stay inside and try not to breathe so much."
Really?
They literally.
That's the advice?
Yeah, that's the advice the parents are. So that's built from a system that doesn't care about its people in the provinces.
Yeah.
If you live in the middle of nowhere in these little towns where you live your life, you are born and you die in these little towns in Russia, there's no hope. Unless you get out and get to Moscow or get to St. Petersburg, your life is very short. It's very cruel and boring and brutal. And I mean, that's why, everybody jokes about the dash cam cameras, and you see all the crazy, that must be Russia because it's crazy.
Yeah.
That's because everybody's either drunk or bored out of their minds.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's not a great, I mean, like I'm from a flyover state, you're from a flyover state. I mean, I'm a Michigander, a Californian hybrid, but you're a Minnesotan. Our lives are not that much worse than you would see in some of the urban centers of the United States. Like, I could live in San Diego or I could live in Saginaw.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get
you're gonna get yes, exactly.
I'm gonna get
your basic needs will be met.
We could argue the system, but there's healthcare, there's groceries, there's infrastructure, bridges, that kind of stuff. You go into the vast majority of Russia, and it's not, unless it benefits the capital, it's neglected.
If it pleases the Kremlin.
Because it's all vertical. That's the thing. And that's
Everything's
why Ukrainians are fighting so hard, because that power system that exists in Russia, it goes one way.
Yeah.
And it goes, its power is always going up, 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 up. It's modern day feudalism.
Yeah.
So, that's part of a good deal of what I learned when I was living in Russia, is just how brutal Russian life can be. And, for whatever, somebody who supports Russia just to counter America is not only doing a disservice to America, but actually doing a disservice to the millions and millions of Russians who live under a brutal system. And it's been like that for centuries. Again, I hope it changes after the war.
Do you think it's like the internet, too, that's added the cognitive dissonance?
I think so, too.
It's crazy because with the
point.
internet, that's added so much ability for us to see more and learn more information. And it's also had a complete opposite effect where people have shelled, and then they will just be like, well, I'm just going to be anti-NATO, anti-West, anti-Ukraine because the majority support it, so I'm just going to go against the grain.
Information is very much controlled in Russia. I mean, there are tech-savvy generations, the younger generations who are able to access the internet, especially through a VPN. But aside from that, the Russians are always very good with information warfare and controlling information. It's no wonder that, before we used to call it gaslighting, It was a Potemkin village.
Oh yeah.
Or
the Potemkin training too.
What's the other? There was another phrase. Oh, political correctness. These are two phrases that came out of Russia and the Soviet Union. Is Potemkin villages, where everything is just a facade, and then political correctness, which originally the origins of that term is, you're not thinking politically correct. And that was
kind of funny how it got spun now into the opposite meaning, isn't that? It turned into like such an interesting. I didn't know that.
There's all sorts of stuff.
It's like it's so simple and so stupid. The propaganda is not hard to like. As soon as you figure it out and you're like, okay, it's like this is so dumb, but it works on so many people.
Once you see it, it's hard not to see it.
Yeah.
You can see how once you get kind of the guidebook to it.
Yeah.
You can notice it. When I was working for Fox, I think I told you this story as well, but I'll tell it again. Is that when I came back there was a terror attack in Marseille or Nice or something like that during that period of really intense terror attacks in France.
Yep.
In around the 2015, 2016 era. We were coming back from Heathrow in London, myself and my colleagues, and I heard about the Podesta drop, and I went, "That's Russia." And everybody went, "Oh no, you think Russians or spies are everywhere?" And I'm like, "No, man, that's them. That's what they do." Once you start to see how they operate, it's very easy to notice. And you know what's also interesting is that they've recently gotten more and more sloppy. Did you see, like, in the last 24 hours or so, I know you took yesterday off, well deserved.
Yeah, thank you.
There was a story in the last 24, 36 hours where in Donetsk, I think it was, somewhere in Donbass, they said they found Zelenskaya, the first lady Zelenskaya's passport. And they found it in a room with all sorts of bags of money and things like this.
Whatever, yeah.
And then you look at the passport, and it's clearly her Instagram profile.
What? Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
that's
it's
what
her
they put
picture from her Instagram, and they've put it on a passport on a fake. I think it's a fake Russian passport.
Yeah.
Because it was red, not blue. So. I mean, it's sloppy now.
But
they're not even doing it good. They're not even doing it well anymore.
I know. That's what's stupid, though. Because
they
know people will believe that. Because they'll be like, oh, it's some secret. Because they've never had a passport. They're not traveling outside of their hometown, podunk, whatever the fuck,
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, yeah, sure. This could be a passport.
If you're so inclined to believe Russian propaganda, you're gonna believe it.
That's true.
It's just. And make no mistake about it. I mean, we have a physical kinetic war here in Ukraine, but at the very same time that there's a kinetic war going on, there is a war going on for people's minds.
Yeah,
100%, and they're really good at it, or they used to be.
Yeah, and
this kind of stuff, the passport kind of stuff, shows how sloppy they're getting. But they used to be excellent.
Yeah,
they used to be top notch.
Maybe they're not keeping up with the. I guess, in a sense, the internet and how good it is, some AI shit and fakes. They're trying that, but still, it's still kind of easy to identify when they Photoshop things in or people in. It's still easy to pick that out. But for our older generation, though, I still have to explain to my grandpa, and I love my grandpa. No disrespect to my grandfather. I still got to explain to him how basic things on the cell phone work. So you know what I mean. So. His generation that are involved, because he's not really involved in current events. He's done his time. He's a Marine veteran. He watches some CNN here and there, but he's really not he's more focused on family, which is understandable. But the elderly generation that is into the news or into this, they're going to be susceptible.
Well, they also come from an era where if you see it on television or if you see a video, or if you see you have to do double duty. It's the old Mark Twain thing. Was it Mark Twain?
Yeah.
Where it's it's harder to convince somebody that they've been lied to than to lie to somebody, and that's very much at play right now. But they used to be very good at it. I suspect there's still sections of the GRU and the Russian intelligence agencies that are still doing really well at it, but they're not as good as they used to be. But they study us. They study the United States more than they study any country, because they see us as behind. They see us as being behind everything. You know, I mean, if somebody farts on Red Square, he's a CIA agent. You know, not to be too crude.
The Americans are in the room with them.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. I mean, look at some of the stuff that like Sobolev and the various propagandists on their main channels say. I mean, they really do believe that, like, and that's part of this whole war is them like not accepting Ukrainian agency. That the idea that the Ukrainians are being manipulated by the CIA or MI6. They can't accept that Ukrainians, again, this goes back to why Ukrainians are fighting. They can't accept that Ukrainians are rejecting their system. Because to them, that's crazy. I mean, it's, you know, why don't you want to be the part of the great Russian, you know, empire and how powerful we are, and they bang on about like some of their liberties that they have that we don't have, like you know, basically when they talk about the liberties and the freedoms that they have, basically they're they're talking about the corruption. Because it is in many ways simpler. That it's like, you know, let's not try to do the hard work of civil liberties or of building up a civil society.
The bureaucracies.
I'll just pay it off.
Here's some money. Take care of it. Yes.
With the idea being that for them and their relationship, Russians' relationship with their government, you asked earlier, part of it is you don't bother me and I won't bother you. And to them, they see that as and that's why I think a lot of fellow travelers exist in the United States who are anti-federal government, who are anti, you know, government interference, quote unquote, when they're, you know, building roads and taking taxes to build roads, you know, all the other things that government does and takes taxes for. But their relationship in Russia is don't bother me and I won't bother you. You do what you're going to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I've got my little farm village with a garden where I can pickle stuff and it'll make it through the winter. And I've got enough vodka and I'm good. I've got a pond. Just don't bother me. I don't care. I don't care if my center road. I can see that mentality. I can see that mentality. But it's the old link. I always go back to this Lincoln quote that I love in a letter that he wrote to a childhood friend of his who was anti, you know, well, he was pro-slavery. He was a slave owner, and he was a Confederate supporter. I think he was in Ohio though. In this letter, he says to this guy, he says, "Look, we started this country by saying all men are created equal. Now these people are saying all men are created equal, except for Catholics, immigrants, black people, Jews, you know, take your pick. You can't." You know, and he said, and in this letter he says, if that mentality ever actually takes control of the United States, I would rather, and this is 1855, I would rather immigrate to Russia, where they don't even pretend to have liberty. I had a conflict in my heart when I worked for CBS in the tail end of the 90s, beginning of the aughts in Russia, because this argument, they would present this argument to me, this argument of like, we have this system where we separate. The government does what it does, and we do what we do. And you're full of hypocrisy, they would say to me. You Westerners are filled with hypocrisy. You say that they have the rule of law, but the rich can always buy their way out of a court case. You say you have equality, and yet look how you treat the African Americans and where African Americans are in your society. And I deliberated over this for years, like the better part of a decade, until I found that quote. And Lincoln spoke to me from 1855. The difference is, at least we try. So what's the alternative here? What's the alternative for the people who support Russia? What you're basically saying is, let's not try to have civil society. Let's not have the rule of law. Let's just condense it down to those who have power, those who have money, and, you know, that's don't even try to have civil society. That's the alternative that Russia is presenting. The Ukrainians don't want it, and I think if Americans ever had a real taste of it, they wouldn't want it either.
And that's how, too, I can see how they get people from the far left to support their bullshit. When
That's
you said,
right, too.
When you said that they were attacking the hypocrisy of America, like the issues that we do have systemically,
feeds into that.
It feeds right into it because I know that there's tons of liberals that are watching. They're like, how can someone that votes Democrat like me, or that is more progressive, how can they be supportive of Russia? How can they be saying the same messages that like MAGA Republicans are saying? And I think that's what it is. It's Russia will use America's weak points of our trying to form a more perfect union, always trying to make things better.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress, and they will use the worst of it always, and then that's a good way for like progressives that are saying, well,
and they know exactly what they're doing when they do that. The Russians know exactly. The Russians will talk to the far right and to the far left
at the same time.
Because they know that it divides us.
Yeah,
they're really one of our biggest strengths as a nation is our unity, and they know it. They know exactly. All of our enemies did. You could argue Al Qaeda tried to divide us by causing such a trauma that we would come apart and then start fighting one another. And in many ways, that's kind of come to pass.
Yeah.
But the Russians know it as well, and the Russians will openly say it. We want to divide America. We want to split them up, because if we can split up the West, if we can split up America in particular, they'll divide and conquer. It's all about that kind of stuff.
It's like they're doing that, but then I guess how can Russia get away with the unofficial words with Newland, and when they were talking about NATO won't expand, blah blah blah, and it wasn't ever an official deal or treaty? How can they use that, right? How is that possible?
It's when I hear people talking about this whole we forced this war on Ukraine by NATO expansion eastward. NATO did not expand eastward. The East
expanded
once free of Moscow's oppression,
expanded west.
Fled. Didn't expand.
No,
fled. Ran as quick as they could to the west, because they knew that eventually Moscow, and it's not even Russia, it's Moscow. This applies to Ekaterinburg and Irkutsk and Vladivostok just as much as it does Kyiv and Tbilisi, or Tallinn, or wherever. Moscow, because of this mentality of a vertical power structure, Moscow sucks up all the money, all the power, all the wealth, all the control. If you're Georgia, if you're Ukraine, the second you get a chance, I
want that security.
West.
Yeah.
You head west. We didn't expand east. The East fled west.
Exactly.
And Moscow can't swallow that.
Such a Putin's master strategery of NATO will not expand, and now two countries.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the fact that nothing was ever, aside from discussions that may have happened in international relations, until there's ink and signatures on paper, it's just people talking.
And I feel Russia has no right to even say things about that, because they broke the entire treaty that got us to this.
That's also true.
They broke the Budapest Memorandum, which is the whole.
97,
So they can F themselves in terms of that too. But yeah, that's the one. As soon as I hear that, it's often from the far left. It's the NATO expansion and some shit.
It's the NATO expansion.
You morons. You fucking. I get it. You hate the West. You hate the systemic capitalism that we got. I get it. But you're fucking idiots. You're supporting genocide. Okay. Dude.
I mean, there's that too. Yeah, that gets me pissed off too. Yeah, I've been to the graves. I've been to the mass graves. I've been up to Bucha. I've talked to people, who were witness to, bodies lying in the streets kind of thing, and people being rounded up. And we're going to hear more of that, When more and more territory is liberated, it's going to be, I shudder to think about what we're going to find in Mariupol when the Ukrainians regain Mariupol.
Have you seen the film?
I have not seen 21 days, 20 days in Mariupol?
20,
I haven't seen that movie yet. I know it affected you greatly.
Yeah.
I want to see it. I'm going to see it. But I also speak to people from Mariupol.
Yeah.
My cameraman, when I hire a cameraman to film some of my vlogs, he's a cameraman from Mariupol. He fled. Yeah. And I talked to him about it. I talked to his daughter, who translates stuff for me. She's, from Mariupol. The story's coming out. I really do want to see that movie.
I recommend seeing it here too with Ukrainians.
Yeah, I should do that.
While I was watching it, I also was able to see the Ukrainians' reaction.
Oh yeah,
they're watching it, and they were
tearing up.
Yeah, all the men were in the theater like this.
Yeah, sure.
Every single one. Every
I'm
single
sure
one.
they were.
Yeah, it was.
And then you go to You go to Mariupol, the diaspora from Mariupol, there are 19 centers dotted around the rest of Ukraine where they're giving support to the refugees, the internally displaced people from Mariupol. I have 2 vlogs where I talk about this, and if people go to my channel, there's one specifically about the displaced from Mariupol, I think I called it. And I went to a couple of these centers, these Mariupol centers that they've set up, and the stories that you hear from these people, it's just absolutely horrific. The ones who stayed and then escaped, or the ones that escaped during the initial onslaught, those guys, some of those stories, those guys telling, which I think is what's depicted in this movie, tell stories of like having to go through Russian lines and, you know, them getting people like torn off of buses and separate families.
This one was more so like the imminence of Russia, like is encircling the city, and it's just doomed the whole time. Like they know the Russians were coming. Like you saw Mariupol as it was before, as the Russians weren't even surrounded it, and then like it's just a slow bleed out of the city, and it sucks to watch. But it's important to watch. But and it goes more so because I was going to go on when we were talking about media literacy, and I was going to ask you someone that might like their favorite source, even if it's a good source, like even me, for example, if they watch only me, I would say watch more, or watch more people. That's what, like we had mentioned at the start of the show this morning, you know, how important it is to get to the thing, or get there in person and have that perspective of being there, like on the ground. And that's what helped me out. And now I know not everybody can do that. Not everybody can go to the...
Well, thank God we now have the ability to do things like what you're doing, what I'm doing. Is, you know, we can do this independent of the, you know, multi-million-dollar corporate interests, which are. Look, I came from that. I was in the press corps for 25 plus years. I worked for CBS, I worked for Fox, I worked for Sky, CNN, ABC, you name it. I've done that thing, and I knew at the beginning of this war how they were going to cover this war, because it's a profit margin for them in many ways. Now, the guys who are on the ground here at the tip of the spear, my former colleagues, those are generally, not exclusively, but generally, they're earnest journalists who are trying to do the best they can in a system that is built on profit. They're selling airtime. So I knew what was going to happen. And I had job offers at the beginning of the full-scale war. And I turned them all down. Now, thankfully, because I had some investments, I was able to support myself. But I knew what the press corps was going to do. And they've done what I expected them to do. Go to the front lines. Go to the bang-bang. Go to the hospitals. Go to the stuff that's going to draw eyeballs to your reporting, not because it's important or you're relaying information, although that also does happen, but because you got to make it to the commercial break, so that you can sell, you know, boner pills and diapers and you know, adult diapers and shit like that. It's the system. They're caught in. I don't blame the journalists. I blame the system in which they work. So I broke away from that. You're not doing that. There are lots of guys out here doing stuff independently. And I think that's the future. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I think that's the future. And the dinosaur of the corporate media, they haven't realized they're dead yet, but it's coming.
It is.
But if you want to get information about this place, you go to people who are actually on the ground, who are seeing it firsthand, and have the liberty to say what they want, and the ability to say it as long as they want, in whatever way they want. And it's not solely financially motivated, but also like go to the agencies that just put out raw footage without commentary, without cutting it up, and putting a narration to it, that kind of stuff. Look, there are also legitimate guys who are still in corporate news. I mean, you know, I've seen some great things by Fred Plitkin over at CNN, and Fred he's a CNN man. He works within the confines of CNN, but he's still able to put out goods. I know lots of people at CNN that do that. They work within the system as best they can. But the system itself is flawed, deeply flawed. So that's why I'm doing my vlogs. That's why, you know, guys like Dylan, like you, like Johnny, you know, the guys who are on the ground here, independently working, we're going to probably be more forthright with an audience because we don't have an agenda aside from.
And we know that we need our audience too,
and appreciate our audience.
We appreciate our audience. It's a community. It's more than like I'm telling you the information and you're gonna like it. It's like it's like interactive. If I'm wrong, someone can correct me live at most times,
or I can get a request. Hey, I want to know more about this. I'm working right now on a vlog from Odessa, which I did. With a Ukrainian-American journalist, where we go into the market in Odessa.
Ooh.
And I can take as long as I want. I can do a 25-minute long thing about the market in Odessa.
Sweet. That sounds awesome.
And I'm doing that in part because I've had people say to me, like I've said, I love going to my market. I made a joke on a podcast one time about how much I love Ukrainian pickles. And everybody's like, oh, we want to learn more about what's this whole Ukrainian pickle thing.
Do you like that, Freedom? Because like I've always had that, and I don't know how to work it. Because like right now, after we're done
here, it's a double-edged sword.
Because right now here, I could be like, I want to go do a video today in Maidan, and I could go do that if I wanted to. Whereas like you've had confines, and you've been like, no, you probably had editors tell you, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, we're not going to phrase it that way. You need to cut that down.
Yeah,
and or it's like we want you to explain the conflict in Ukraine in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Because we only have this amount of time in the A block before we get to our first commercial block, which is really what we're going for. We just need to make it to the commercials. So keep the eyeballs on. And you have this. This is the restraint that you. I mean, not explain the entire war, but like, okay, so there was a bomb in Kramatorsk yesterday, like the pizza place.
Yeah.
Explain the pizza restaurant explosion in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. You can do it, but you're really only skating on the surface.
Yeah.
And this conflict is far too complex
for
it to be covered in a 30-minute nightly news broadcast on CBS.
Yeah.
Or an hour block in CNN where you get 5 minutes tops.
Especially when you know that the Russian side is hurling misinformation 24/7 non-stop.
You're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Like it is like as we're speaking right now, I'm sure it's just floods of it on it. Yeah.
I'm sure.
So before we continue, I'm going to ask Philip about Serbia. I'm going to ask him about Kosovo. I'm going to ask you about Azerbaijan, Armenia. But before we do that, we'll do a weather report, and I'm going to get his mind working. And we'll take a couple of the viewer questions.
Alex.
We are missing Alex. So
now I can comment on some of these topics. But I'm not nearly as much of an expert on some of these topics as I am on Ukraine and places I've physically been. I've been to Georgia in the Caucasus, and when I was a Moscow correspondent, Nagorno-Karabakh and the Armenian-Azerbaijan story was something I had to pay attention to. But I've never actually been to Azerbaijan and Armenia, although I'd love to.
You'd love to. You know what's going on.
But I know generally the topic, so we can absolutely. But it's but Andrew, it's also overarching. I thought about this.
That's why I want to ask you.
You asked me if I could talk on these topics, and I can. But I think there's also one other thing that's all of this, the umbrella topic that we're going to talk about now, all pertains to the fact that Moscow, again, as the center, because everything, it's the center of gravity. That's that vertical power thing that I was talking about. So Moscow is the center of gravity upon which everything revolves. And Moscow is starting to fray. Everybody knows it. The clock is ticking on Vladimir Putin. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Nobody loses what Catherine the Great took. And by that I mean the Black Sea, Odessa, Crimea, and survives. I don't care if you're Vladimir Putin. I don't care if you're Vladimir Lenin. I don't care if you're Stalin. I don't care who you are. You lose what Catherine took. Click, tick, 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 tick.
Now they're on borrowed time.
And so the center of gravity is loosening. And so that's why you're seeing what's happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan. I suspect there's a good chunk of that between Serbia and Kosovo. I suspect we're going to see it more in the Caucasus. There's separatist areas in Georgia that the dynamic is going to change when Moscow's authority becomes looser and looser. There are sections of Central Asia and Kazakhstan in particular. There's a northern section of Kazakhstan that could be meddled with by the Muscovites. There's a whole Islamic kind of revolution that has always been trying to gain traction in a place called the Fergana Valley in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, down into Afghanistan even.
Yep.
But all of these places, these disputes that Moscow, for their own interests, not out of some sort of compassion, but they like to pit one another, one group against another. They also like to fracture things and then and maintain control through that fracturing. And without Moscow, these things are increasingly going to fracture and break away. And as the center of gravity loosens and loosens, this war, the Ukraine war, in my mind, is actually not the real crisis. I mean, this is a crisis, no doubt about it. And I will be so happy to see Ukraine liberated and sovereign and free. And that's a good thing to see in and of itself. But I don't think this is the real crisis. I think the real crisis happens when Vladimir Putin or whatever happens with the power structure in Moscow, when that change happens, when they lose this war, there's
gonna rip apart.
Yeah, the ripple effect, because there's so much. Because Putin also made it impossible for there to be a loyal opposition, because he's again monolithic. It's all vertical power structure. So he never allowed for there to be loyal opposition that could maybe take place. Take his place in the Kremlin. So there's this vacuum. When Putin goes, which Putin is going to go, what happens?
Right.
And I hope to God that there are people in the State Department, in London, in Paris, and Berlin that are seriously looking at the possibility that we could see a real collapse in the Russian Federation and its near abroad, the former Soviet Union, because Moscow has always manipulated these things. So you asking me about Armenia and Azerbaijan? Moscow has tried to keep control of this. The tempest in a teapot sort of thing. And they've always they've put their finger on the scale when it comes to Armenia, because and again, I don't want to go into the deep specifics of it because it's very complicated, but there's a breakaway republic inside Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh. It's up in the mountains, and it is ethnically Armenian. It's in this border region between the two countries that hate one another, because one is a Christian, one is Orthodox Christian, one is Muslim, but there's this ethnic. You're up in the mountains, and there's this little enclave connected by a very thin strip of land where people are ethnically Armenian, but internationally recognized within Azeri borders. Okay. So there's been this it flares up every now and again, and then Moscow intervenes and it taps it.
So they send Russian peacekeepers.
Yeah,
right?
And generally they take the position on the side of Armenia. I don't want to say categorically because it's really complicated, but Azerbaijan has ties to Turkey. Azerbaijan has a lot more wealth than Armenia does, a lot more natural resources. The Baku oil fields are there. It's a much more wealthy, and it has the support of Turkey, that kind of thing. But Moscow's always intervened, and while not overtly supporting Armenia, they've kind of kept these two, in some sort of balance, influenced by them. Without them, now we're seeing what's happening with the Azeris having cut the land bridge. I suspect we're going to hear some pretty nasty stories coming out of Nagorno-Karabakh, whether or not the international community pays attention, because we're very much distracted by this. Rightly, unfortunately so. I was going to say rightfully or wrongly. There's no rightfully or wrongfully about it. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality, is that the focus is here for good reason. But it's still unfortunate about Nagorno-Karabakh, and it will be. But again, this plays into the thing that I say about Moscow, because the way they set it, the way it's been set up, is that when you remove that, things start to fall apart. So
it's kind of like a Band-Aid that they put on. You take the Band-Aid off, but the wound is still there. It's like it's been hiding under the Band-Aid.
Exactly. They like Band-Aid over this like gaping wound.
Yeah.
When really what you need is a suture.
And
they're just and they kind of kept it going for their own purposes, ripped off the Band-Aid every now and again and applied a new one, when, again, like you say, we really should have sutured it up. But that's going to happen again and again. We're going to see it. I mean, there's Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia. I mentioned the Fergana. There's Kazakhstan. There are fault lines in the Baltics, in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, but that would only be exacerbated by Moscow, because what they would do is they would have Russian-speaking, the Russian-speaking communities in the Baltic states, they would agitate and then create a crisis, and then Moscow would say, oh, we have to come in and help our ethnic Russian minority in Estonia. It's the same thing they did here.
The East.
They did in Donbass. The exact same thing.
The same playbook.
The exact same talk.
Okay, before I ask you a further question, let's take a couple of the viewers, because they had asked a couple questions here a little earlier. But before we do that, let's get the weather really quick, and because Alex isn't here and we don't get a weather. We didn't get a weather report the other day. So I'll tell you guys, it's beautiful outside right now. It's 53 Fahrenheit, but it feels really good for 53.
No, it's lovely.
It's a lovely day.
But it is changing.
We're
not in summer anymore. I'd say we have got about a month before the heavy rains, I hope,
even
which will
looking
affect
at
the front. So, but right now, this is actually one of my favorite times.
I love this time. I love this time of year in general.
I love the transition between from summer into fall.
Yeah.
It's like that period where it's not too hot, hasn't gotten too cold yet. Right. It's this middle ground. It's great. It's lovely. It's lovely.
The colors too. When you look out, I see the trees, the red trees. I'll take you guys around Kyiv. I'll do this week. I'm going to do more streams and just walking around the city and show you guys the colors. But it's just beautiful. Really good weather today, and I think we're going to have a beautiful weather the rest of the time. Next weekend it looks like some rain, but it's going to be in the mid 60s, upper 60s, and then when I leave next week, it's going to start getting cold. The high of a 52. So. Yeah, it'll be chilly.
And then we'll go into fall, and there'll be lots of mud and rain. That'll affect the front lines. Hopefully not too bad. Then we'll go back into winter, and I mean, like Budanov said, the fighting's not going to stop.
Yeah, it didn't stop last winter either.
Didn't stop last winter either.
Up in Kupiansk, over in the northeast, the Ukrainians kept advancing towards Svadova. It didn't stop. So, all right, a couple of these. Let me see here. Thank you for all the gifted memberships from everybody, from Mortlack, K. Hansen, Linda, that bearded guy, Chris, Ozzy T, of course, Max, RF from USA. Okay, here you go. Paul says, how much did Russian disinformation affect Slovakian election? I'm also
a lot. I have no doubt.
I'm also hearing that Russians are meddling with our referendum here in Austria or Australia?
Probably in Austria would be my bet.
All right, go ahead. What do you have to say?
Yeah, look, like I said, we have a kinetic war here in Ukraine. Yeah. There's also a war that's been going on for a long time, and it continues to happen now, of information warfare.
Yep.
The headquarters of the GRU is a place called the Aquarium.
Yeah.
And the Aquarium has been very busy for a long time. I mean, I know I get into really controversial territory when I talk about our presidential election. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind that Russia manipulated our 2016 election.
Oh, yeah.
And because it was so close, I contend that we have Trump. Yeah. We have Russia to thank for Trump in many ways.
I mean, you're not even wrong, because even though Trump wasn't directly found culpable, there was so many other people that were that were literally arrested
and
are facing time. Yeah, they're in prison for collusion with Russia. It's just not Trump and his. Yeah.
Well, and if you really do get the takeaway from the Mueller report, it's not. It was he continued 10 acts of obstruction.
Yeah.
Why were they obstructing? They were obstructing because they didn't want to talk about their relationship with Russia.
Exactly.
But look, I try to stay away from 2016 too much, because it just gets messy and everybody brings their own baggage into it.
Yeah.
I know where I stand on 2016, and I stand that the Russians.
I made the wrong choice in 2016. I was caught up in it.
Did you vote?
I voted for Trump. Yep. I was caught up in it. Yep. That's how I can speak. I know so much about, or that's how I can speak directly about media literacy and how much being in person has changed my perspective.
We teach our children how to read. We should be teaching them how to also take in television and information just in general. Electronic media we need to train our children how to absorb that. Because there is an information war going on. So like not only 2016, not only Slovakia, not only Austria is a real problematic, because we know that there's even the deputy foreign minister invited Putin or had Putin at her wedding.
Yep. That
sort of thing. It's the Russians have been infiltrating the West. Again, this is another instance of NATO didn't expand. It's all how you look at it. NATO didn't expand east. East came running west. Well, we, in our hubris at the end of the Cold War, thought that it would be our system of the rule of law, capitalism, democracy that would go east. What happened was the corruption and the mindfuckery came west, and they have been messing with our minds for a really long time. I contend Brexit was that the Russians were involved in Brexit. They were involved in the 2016 presidential election. They've been caught repeatedly in all sorts of countries in Europe. Moldova. We know that there was a incident where they were openly giving money to candidates in Moldova. Because Moldova is this is another the cinder cannot hold thing, but Moldova is this like part of Europe where there's heavy Russian influence, and they're clearly manipulating the elections there. We know that they're giving money to like Le Pen in France. They're very, they know they can't, for all their threats of taking on NATO, they clearly can't take on. They can't take on Ukraine.
They can't take on Ukraine with our old shit.
Right. So they know they can't take us on in a head-to-head.
Right.
But what they can do, and what they're very good at, is information warfare.
Yeah. It's an evil genius kind of, because it's like, how are you getting Americans?
It's so hard to defend against because we have freedom of speech.
Right. That's what it is. It's like you got that. You can always fall back.
And they use it against us. They use it against us.
It's like they got.
Look at the idiot in Moscow firing off artillery rounds, regurgitating. I'm sure he gets it directly. There are how many people online regurgitating Russian talking points because Russia is putting out talking points for them to suck up and regurgitate.
Or even Americans voluntarily offering some talking points for them. But the thing, too, is how they have Americans that are overly patriotic, wearing red, white, and blue American flags everywhere, but yet they're so anti-American now. Isn't that crazy how they have all the Americana,
and they think
all of the look of being a pro-American? And
I think part of it is the fellow travelers, the idea of like, I don't want the government involved. They've had that similar kind of idea of like you do you, and I'm going to be a citizen, a sovereign citizen state.
Though, because these types of people are so involved in like they're like they bitch about the government every day, every day.
But then they want to be.
But yet they want to
tell their fellow citizens, and they want to be isolationists. No, they're very, very good. The Russians are extremely good at information warfare, and if you see something. So you asked me, how can your average audience member, get good information?
Yeah.
One thing that I always say about information warfare is if you read something that you have a very visceral response to, especially if it's in the headline or in the first paragraph of a story, that's meant to be. That they are trying to manipulate you. And just always, whenever you see something that instantly makes you go, oh, I'm angry, or elicits a really strong emotional response, it's probably on purpose, and you should maybe, before you act on it, check yourself and go, find another source.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the really good things that one of the most effective techniques that the Russians have is to elicit this really strong response from somebody, and then they fly off. That's why they support the far left and the far right. Because they can elicit this very strong emotional response and then pit it against the polar opposite, which is also having a very emotional response. And so what that does is it initiates a conflict and divides us. It's all about dividing us. And they're They're very talented at it.
Man, they are.
It does suck, and we really need to be better at it.
We do.
We got to be a lot better at it.
All right, a couple more here. Great topic there. No, we're fine. Okay. How can Polish and Czech support be bolstered so they don't fall prey to conservative pro-Russian influence domestically like Slovakia and parts of Bulgarian and Moldovan societies?
Yeah,
Wow, that sounds like
it's all the same.
Sounds like a test question.
It does, but it's all the same sort of thing that we've already been discussing.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Poles, the Poles are kind of a special situation, and it's very complicated because Poland is headed by a right-wing, a right-wing government. But the Poles also know the threat coming from Moscow. So while there's this right-wing kind of like reactionary government, they have to play both sides of the coin because their population and their history of Poland, they know very well the threat from Moscow.
Yeah.
So they're balancing that. But then, all the Eastern European countries that have a legacy, good and bad, mostly bad, with Russia, but they were also supported by Russian elements, and there are Russian elements within their country that are being supported by the Kremlin and the GRU and the Aquarium. This is, again, it's a complicated question, and the simple answer is that we have to support civil society, and we have to also recognize the threat from Russia.
Yeah.
And if there's a silver lining to this awful war, it's that maybe we're going to wake up and realize that 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union was not the end of the story, and the threat
clearly
from
not.
Moscow. And we have to recognize that Moscow is a malign actor on the global stage, that their intention is to divide and conquer, that democracies and the rule of law are anathema to them, that now that there is an open information flow between Russia and the rest of the world, that maybe their own citizens are going to want what Europe, a lot of what Ukraine is about is the fact that the Ukrainians are going to show the Russians that yes, you can be Orthodox Christian, yes, you can be Slavic, and you can also still be European and have the rule of law and democracy. Because if the Ukrainians can do it,
clearly, yeah,
then there are going to be a lot of Russian citizens that are going to be like, hey, why can't we? So,
but also too the other religions that are here as well that are also represented.
I mean that's another. Well, that's
a
you're
whole.
Right.
That's a whole.
That's a whole other thing, and it's a good point we're bringing up actually. Though is that one of the reasons why I'm working on an article. I'm formulating it in my mind, an op-ed about if you really don't want Nazis in Ukraine, you better help them win, because
that's a good one.
If Ukraine loses, which it won't do, but in a worst case scenario they lose, Moscow regains control here, there's going to be an underbelly of Ukrainian nationalists that will get more and more violent and angry and frustrated, and you don't want to give support to those people by suppressing them, which is what Moscow will do. Yeah. What you want to build a civil society.
And show the.
This is So Ukraine is a multicultural country out of birth of history. Empires have crossed through here. One of the tragedy of Ukraine, fundamentally, is that empires have always crossed through here, taken territory, tried to hold it against other empires. Other empires have come here and tried to wrest it away, and so. That's why it's been incredibly violent, and this place is soaked in blood, and this war has to be the end of it. That's why this war needs to be resolved categorically, so that there's no more bloodshed in 10 or 15 years or down through the centuries. Right. This needs to be resolved. But Ukraine grew as a multicultural country because of this crossing of empires through this territory. Russia became multi-ethnic by conquest, by means of conquest. Because what happened was when not to go too deeply into a history lesson, but when Ukraine was taken over by the Mongols, the Mongols decided that it was too dangerous to have their representative capital in Europe be in Kyiv, because it was too close to the rest of Western Europe. So they pulled it back to this little village in the middle of nowhere in a forest. I'm oversimplifying this, called Moscow, and that's where they would. they would come and get their tribute. So in essence, Moscow became the bagman for the Mongol hordes instead of Kiev. Once they conquered Kiev, they pulled back to Moscow to go and get their tribute.
Interesting.
Eventually, Moscow got rich off of that. The Chinese beat the hell out of the Mongols, and so the Mongol Empire started to recede. When the Mongol Empire receded, the bagmen in Moscow, feeling their oats and having the wealth that was contributed by Eastern Europe for tribute to the Mongols, started to expand.
I see.
So let me condense that back after my history lesson. Ukraine became multi-ethnic by outside forces coming in and crossing through. Moscow became multi-ethnic by expanding by conquest and absorbing other ethnicities, which always means that there is a central ethnic group in Russia called Rus, the Russians. And so that's why they're more inclined to be fascist, and I would argue currently are fascist, as opposed to Kiev, which has to deal with all these different ethnicities, have through several centuries had to negotiate with one another. Sadly, because of the fighting by other empires, they've pitted one another against each other, and that's why this place is so soaked in blood. There's another vlog I did called Salina, the legacy of Salina, where this exact thing happened, where the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, killed a bunch of Ukrainian nationalists, and then blamed it on the Jewish population. And then when the SS came in, they blamed it on the Jewish population because, of course, they're Nazis. Right. And so, more blood. Everybody using Ukrainians, using the different ethnicities here to pit one another against one another. And that's why this place is so soaked in blood. Not to remove Ukrainian agency.
Right.
This is Ukrainians killing Ukrainians, ultimately. But one thing, if there's another silver lining, is the fact that maybe these ethnicities, and I do see this in Ukraine, and I've been coming here for 22 years, is that these regional conflicts between these different groups, they're gone. We're all Ukrainian now. Yep. We're all Ukrainian. Whether you're from Ivano-Frankivsk on the Romanian border, you're Russian out in Kharkiv, or you're something else down in Odessa, or different. You're Polish out in Lviv. Ethnically, right. That doesn't exist anymore. Russia has unified Ukraine like nothing else. So, I don't know. I think that all this argument of Nazism and stuff like that, it's here, obviously, sadly, but it's been in many ways exacerbated by outside influences. And I'm hoping, and I believe 100% that the Ukrainian people don't want, even if there are Nazis, even if there are militias out there that have some really nasty Nazi fascist sentimentality or allegiances, the people of Ukraine, because of this multi-ethnic essence of the country, they'll reject it if they win. If they lose, which isn't going to happen, but let's say worst case scenario, it will only foment more, because that kind of attitude doesn't come from a healthy society. It comes from a really fucked up society.
Yeah, fucked up past.
Which is why Ukraine is trying to make a break.
And it's wild, because if America was ever invaded, we would have Nazis. But it's like, from the historical context of understanding how Nazis came through here, and just like you said, different empires through society have just taken from Ukraine. You can kind of like through that see like, okay, I understand the remnants of it. But America, we've never had Nazi power there. But you have people who are still voluntarily Nazis there. Like they have these fascist ideologies, and it's just absolutely mind blowing that is even a talking point to be anti-Ukraine. It's just very unfortunate, but also Russian propaganda at the same time.
Also, a lot of Russian, and Russia, Russia wants the world to think that this place is filled with Nazis. But if you actually come here,
you'll
spend time with the Ukrainians,
literally,
you'll be here for like a day,
and
you'll realize, this place is not Nazi.
Oh, this place is lit.
This place is
based.
It's not. And I mean, literally, I talk to Ukrainians who just totally object to the idea of Nazism, because they have to live with all these different ethnic groups in Ukraine, and they're also, I don't know if you've noticed this, Have you? This is something I want to ask you, as somebody who's
Yeah.
relatively new to Ukraine, but in comparison.
Right.
I get the sense that Ukrainians, they don't just want to be a liberal democracy. They don't just want the rule of law. They don't just want to be a part of this family of democratic nations. They want to be a shining example of it. They don't want to just take it to like, oh, we're going to have reforms. It's like, no, we want to have LGBTQ rights. We want to have, they're legalizing marijuana.
They're progressive.
They're progressive as hell. And there's all the guys walking around with their,
there's a lot of hipster stuff going on
here. Wax mustaches and stuff. They really, really want to be part of, and they're well educated, and many of them are well traveled. They know what it is they're asking for. I believe at least 90%. There's probably some stuff on the edges that they don't realize, like gay marches and stuff. There's probably going to be those who are going to be we wanted liberal democracy, but that scares us.
Too much liberal democracy.
But by and large, vastly, they know what they're asking for.
Yeah, exactly.
And they want to be an example of what can happen when you overturn autocracy, when you make a conscious decision to turn your back on that and build modern liberal democracy. This place is filled with so many people.
And I joke with Starsky too. I'm like, Ukraine will be the leader of the free world now, and he's like, he laughs. I'm like, you're not.
No,
I'm not shitting you, because I think also too, it's just the recent history of Ukraine having to fight for its independence. Like, they had it in 1991, but in 2014 they had to literally, they were getting killed right down the street for their independence.
Sure were. I was there.
I'm speaking to the choir, more so speaking to you guys. I'm talking to a guy who was here, but I think that is also
it's got to mean something.
Yeah,
you make a very good point, and I'm glad to hear you say that, and because after all the blood and everything, like, I was on Maidan, and it was like, okay, now we're going to have a process of hopefully we'll build, and all the while Russia was undermining and cutting and cutting and cutting. This, since February 2022. This is now something completely different. This is now like, we have to make this count. After all the pain and the suffering and, everything that everyone has gone through in this country, everybody I know has lost somebody or knows somebody who's lost somebody. I mean, it's touched every single family. It has to mean something. So I hear them talk. I already hear, like, Ukrainians, because Ukrainians realize they're going to win this war. They know it.
Oh, yeah.
So they're almost to the point of, well, what comes next?
Exactly.
So this has to count for something. And the first thing that they're going to do is tackle corruption. They're really big on that. Even to the point of me, I have some concerns about anti-corruption, because I'm afraid that they might disproportionately give power to the police, and that could turn into kind of a police state kind of situation.
Yeah, we don't want it to be like
we don't
the
want
US.
it to be like that. And most Ukrainians don't want it to be like that. But they do want to get rid of corruption. They want to break away from the corruption in Russia and build, as you say, a leader in freedom and democracy. They really do want, and they look to us.
Yeah, they do. They
do
still do.
Look to America.
They all still do. America, UK, the West. They really do. I've had personal conversations with Ukrainians that have said this. Like, they, as much as Americans are believed or taught from propaganda forces that America's weak and no one respects our military. No one fuck
not
you.
True.
Not true at all.
Not true at all.
Absolutely not true. All right, a couple more here from the super chats, then we'll take regular questions for Philip. We'll have breakfast after this. Well, I don't have a pork bun in my hand. That's a meme. Thank you for your guys' incredible work from WL. Mosi says thanks for bringing attention and supporting Ukraine. Thank you. 66. Oh, that's the other thing too. We just kind of started, but in the description, the reason why I'm here in general, this morning show came from this. But my whole ticket into Ukraine is to bring trucks, NAFO trucks, and we bring in a total. This is our 7th one now that we're working on, and it's in the description. It's a 4x4 electronic warfare van, and that will be for sure done for the November convoy, but we'll likely start another one. So I'm trying to have 2 vehicles on the November convoy. Let's continue fundraising. We're at 65%. You guys are doing absolutely great work on that front with the NAFO trucks. We had drones too this time. We had
It's great what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's great what you're doing. My purpose being here is to bring my skill set, which is doing vlogs, doing video stuff. I may do it in kind of an old-fashioned way because I used to be CBS and CNN and all that kind of stuff. But my intention was to bring my history of knowledge of this place and try to normalize Ukraine and understand that these are people. These are just people like you and me trying to just build a better life, and it is the American Revolution. It is 1776, 100%. And I wanted, my intention was to bring my skill set to that. But what you're doing is tangible. What I'm doing is kind of like loosey-goosey.
I know you're
Hey,
important.
look, these are who the Ukrainians are. No, I don't. I'm not discounting it. But you can't. It's not something tangible. You can put your, the more eyeballs that I can get on my vlog, that's the only measure I can get of how effective or ineffective or spinning my own wheels I am here. But you're bringing drones and vehicles and stuff.
I figured because
I think that's great.
I figured because it's like, as a guy who started covering this on the full-scale invasion, because I had no knowledge prior, honestly. Like, I was in the military myself, and even being in the U.S. military, you're very sheltered from information other than, like, honestly, Fox News, to be honest, in the DFAC, or CNN maybe in the airports. But beyond that, you're not. We're told what we're told from the Middle East. Like, we were focused on the Middle East. So Euromaidan happened. I had no idea. No idea what happened at all, honestly. And nothing.
It wasn't on the radar.
It wasn't even on the blip. So I'd say, as someone like that's from Minnesota, random guy with a YouTube channel, I figured the best way, if I want to actually get some work done here and get news or information out, I gotta bring a truck and bring a drone. Help the Ukrainians in that way.
No, absolutely.
Do what I can do, and it's worked
and
so far.
I've done my support here and there. I've got a unit that I pay for their Starlink, for example. But bringing over vehicles, bringing over drones and optics and all that kind of stuff. And I've helped like the Legion, and Malcolm Nance. I've occasionally
Malcolm's great.
Helped those guys. But really, what my intention has been, and I'll do tangible stuff as well. But I think it's really important that we humanize the Ukrainians, and that we explain that these are a people who have been fucked with so much throughout their entire history, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop, and it's got to be. I talk about how the Ukrainians already know that they're going to win the war, and the next battle is corruption. But there's another issue in that, and I recently saw that the Professor Timothy Snyder, if you want a good debrief on like the history of this place, Snyder is our best academic. He was recently here in Kyiv, and he made the point that once we win the war, we have to secure the peace, because this has to be the last war for this territory. It has to stop. You can't just have different empires thinking that they can
take Ukraine, like
parts of it. And they don't even take Ukraine. I mean, they do take Ukraine for its own resources, but they also take it as a way to get to another empire. It's one of these. Sadly, it's one of these thoroughfares where empires cross through, and that's got to stop. And they're not. The other thing that I love about Ukrainians and being here in Kyiv is that you talk to the people in Kyiv and you talk to Ukrainians, and they're well aware. They're very, very smart, very well educated, and they're also very savvy. They're not just going to trade one colonial master for another. So if Washington or Brussels think that they're going to start telling Kyiv what to do, they're wrong. That's so much of this fight is about being sovereign. And when this country is fully sovereign, where it's not being manipulated by outside border, empires and stuff like that, this is going to be a kick-ass country. It's going to be hugely powerful.
It's kick-ass already with this.
It already is. It's part of the reason why I think there. I don't want to say there are governments, but there are factions within governments within Europe that are really actually afraid of a sovereign Ukraine because it's going to shift the balance of the European Union. Because the GDP here, when they get their act together, when they start to get rid of corruption, when they're doing the Lend-Lease repayments, they're going to be saddled with that kind of stuff. But the GDP is still going to be enormous here, and it's going to shift the balance of power in Europe. And I think there are factions in Europe they've been betrayed before. They've been, both East and West have fucked with this country, and it's got to stop.
And in so many ways too, I feel like Ukraine is more advanced than even the U.S. Like, just something very simple and very anecdotal. Like, I live next to a convenience store. It's a gas station, but we go in there, you can get snacks and shit. I wanted to pay, and I pulled out my phone. Like anywhere here in Ukraine, you can pull out your phone, Apple Pay everywhere.
Yep.
You know, here it is, like every single place, everywhere, and it's always through the app. You don't even have to. It's just so advanced. And we don't even have simple things like that in the U.S. Like I couldn't pay. Like I forgot my card in my truck or something because I just had my phone on me because I don't need my card here. I don't even need cash here in most places.
Yeah. And they're also building civil society. They're building, they're reforming their court system. They're reforming their legal system. They got a lot of work to do on that, but they're still doing it. Even in times of war, they're having corruption investigations, and some of the oligarchs have been arrested and are facing trials here. They're gonna change this. The war, as traumatic and awful as it is, it's gonna result in a country that is absolutely amazing. And when it's all said and done, I mean, come to Ukraine. If you're worried about coming down, we're stupid enough to. Well, we're not stupid. We're willing to take the risk because the risk is worth taking. For those of you who don't want to take the risk during a time of war, when this is resolved, come here. This country is amazing. It is beautiful. The food is great. The people are great. Music, art.
It's vibrant. It's alive.
It's alive. It's this young country.
Yep.
It's this 1776 moment where, like, I feel privileged in many ways to be here at the birth of a new nation.
Yeah, same.
It must be similar to what like Europeans who came to America to see the birth of, the USA must have kind of felt, because you talk to Ukrainians and they're incredibly hopeful.
Yeah.
They're traumatized.
Yeah.
But they're incredibly hopeful about what kind of a country that they can build. And I believe them. This isn't going to be a Nazi country. Screw you, Moscow. Mm-hmm. That's a bullshit narrative. The corruption they're going to tackle, and they have so many resources that they have the means to build something. And then they have the young people who are invigorated, and like you said, this entire country is energized.
Yeah, you can feel
It's amazing to be here. When this war is over and the shooting stops, and you feel you can safely come here, come and visit this country if you can.
Plus, you'll have airports you can land into, actually. You won't have to do the whole land in Poland, hop on a bus, hop on a train, hop on a bus, hop on a train to get here.
It'll be much easier when you can fly into Odessa.
Trust
me. Or
me,
you can fly into Kyiv.
Because it's a journey getting here right now. But when you can actually come into Ukraine, it'll be great. All right, let's do final thoughts, Philip. I know you just gave a bunch, but just anything.
I'm kind of all over the place. I'm working on my vlogs. I hope you'll check out my vlogs.
Tell the people what you got.
I've got a website up. I'm still working on it, so it's not 100% done, but you can just go to PHILLIP, PHILLIP.com.
We'll put that in the description of the stream.
I'm going to be putting out a vlog today. The vlog I described down in Odessa at the market. I love markets in this part of the world because you can learn a lot by just walking through the markets. It's a way of connecting with the community. And I did the one in Odessa, which is probably one of the largest markets in the world, called Privoz. Yep. I did it with a Russian, Ukrainian-American journalist friend of mine, and she was great. So check out my vlogs, but then I've got older vlogs about Salina and Bucha and Irpin and like going out east, and I was in Chasiv Yar and all the rest of it. I'm not so keen on going right up to the front lines anymore because I've done that. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You've done that.
I've been there, done that. But I still felt a responsibility to do it. But primarily my intent is to show Ukraine as a real place with real people who are suffering from an attack by an enemy that is brutal and cruel and has blood on its hand for centuries, has subjugated this country for centuries. Like, so much of the bad stuff that's in Ukraine is a direct result of Russia not absolving Ukrainians of their agency, but a lot of the poison in this country comes from Moscow. That's what I'm trying to do with my channel. So that's what I'm hoping to do, is to humanize the Ukrainians and show the wider world why we should support Ukraine, why Russia is wrong and Russia needs to be defended against. And that's my whole purpose of being here. So I thank you for letting me spew. I'm all over the place.
Oh,
I was
great.
actually
No,
got up
this
about
point,
2 hours
it's fine.
to work on the vlog, but I hope to get that vlog out later today. I'll send you a link.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I'm glad you're here.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're here. I'm
Yeah,
glad
yeah.
you're bringing stuff.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're giving an audience to and a voice to all these great internationals and Ukrainians who are here fighting a good fight, because this is a good fight.
Yeah.
If there's a just war,
This is the one.
it's this one.
Yes.
It's this one. This is on the level of the American Revolution, the Second World War,
Britain in the
This is
1940.
Britain in the 1940. You take your pick of the righteous fights that human history has gone through, and this is one of them. It's going to change the world.
Yeah.
And for the better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Philip, for being a guest on our show. Good morning,
Thanks
Kyiv.
for
Second
watching.
time being a guest
Anytime.
on the show.
I'm always I'm always inclined.
Always. We're going to be doing a bunch of content this week, you guys. I got vlogs coming out. I got more live streams. I'm just going to walk around Kyiv this week and do random streams. So follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Link in the description. I will add Philip's website on there so that you guys can find that and his vlogs and all of his information. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Donate to our NAFO fundraiser. I guess we're at 65%. I'll look after we're done. So we're doing really good, but continue donating to that. We'll also have a war stream tonight. So normal schedule, Monday night war stream. It'd be at 8:15 p.m. Eastern, 3:15 a.m. Kyiv. And then tomorrow we're going to have Aussie Mick Dundee back on. He's a Australian volunteer here.
Is he the guy with the long beard?
No, he's a big Australian guy,
Okay.
though. Our Aussie audience loves him. And then also,
Cool.
Terrell Starr is going to be. Do you know Terrell?
I know Terrell.
Yeah, Terrell.
Yeah.
He's going to be a guest on Friday, so that's going to be
Terrell's
exciting.
great.
Yeah.
Terrell's
Yeah,
great.
He's going to be a good one. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Slava Ukraine.
Good on him, Slava.
Let's go. All right. Now we get to go have breakfast. Breakfast time. No, Alex is gone, you guys. He left back home. Oh, I should have said that, huh? Yeah, Alex will be back on November, y'all. Yep. November, Alex. Take care.